Welcome everyone to this first series of PreCOP events that the Coalition Nuclear for Climate is hosting today. Really hope that you can enjoy it and find it both quite entertaining and educational today. I hope that you discover something new today. This series of PreCOP events are organized by the Coalition Nuclear for Climate, a global grassroots initiative of 150 associations all across the globe, with the aim to educate the public and the policymakers about nuclear energy as one of the possible solutions about climate change, to tackle climate change, following all the statements from the IPCC. Okay. So I'm presenting myself. My name is Ana Tero. I'm a member of the delivery team from the Nuclear for Climate Coalition. I'm going to do a small presentation about the COP context, followed by presentations from three speakers of 10 minutes long, followed by a panel discussion, and then a round of questions from the public. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about Nuclear for Climate. As I said, it's an association from all over the globe, formed, mainly founded by the French, European and American Nuclear Society. And among our activities, we not only do educative activities to teach about nuclear energy applications to public and policymakers. We also do different events at the COP conventions that take every year. Last year, for the first time, we had our own booth at the COP event in Glasgow, and we also organized many events and like, for example, a flash mob and many different educative activities. So just to give a little bit of context, what is the COP? What is COP exactly? So COP has been created from the UNFCCC. You see this big acronym in here. The UNFCCC is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was established in 1992 following the Rio Earth Summit. This Earth Summit was a big event created by the United Nations. And it had a mission. Its mission was to raise global public awareness on related issues about climate change and to stabilize the concentration of greenhouse gas emissions on the Earth atmosphere in order to prevent further risks. So after the Earth Summit, the United Nations created the UNFCCC, and this one had the goal to gather all the countries all about the globe, creating the COP conventions. And these conventions take place once every year, and with the intention to have regular meetings to attend agreements. These meetings are organized by heads of states, ministers, environmental experts, and NGOs. So the first COP event took place in 1992 in Germany, and the most important ones were, first one were the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, and it was an interesting one because for the first time was some targets, some ambitious targets were settled, such as limiting the greenhouse gas emissions for 37 countries, and establishing a reduction of 5% of emissions every year for developed countries. Nevertheless, China and USA this time they didn't sign it, so by the global media considered it in the end as a failure. Followed by it, we had a Cancun, Mexico in 2010. This was also a bit innovative because there was a creation of the Green Climate Fund. It is an entity to aid developing countries to adapt and help organizations to mitigate climate change effect by providing fundings to developing countries. So the goal was to set a $100 billion to developing countries up to 2020. But however, up till this day, we got only $17 billion, and it was given in the form of loans, not of grants. So we still have a lot to do. So following by this, we arrived to 2012. The global emissions doubled from comparing to those of 1990, the year 1990. And then we arrived to the next remarkable COP event, which is in 2015 in Paris, where the Paris Agreement was signed. This one was even more ambitious. It established that it established measure to limit the global warming well below 1.5 degrees, limiting to a maximum increase of 2 degrees average temperature. It also strengthened the ability to adapt climate change and build resilience, and established also facilitated more financial flows towards low greenhouse emissions technologies, and also established the strategies to create resilient societies. It also established for the first time what we hear nowadays a lot, to reach a climate neutral world by 2050. So, and then we arrived to the last COP event in Glasgow in 2021. This one was more or less, we could say it was an event that was reaffirming the agreements from the reaffirming and maybe specifying a bit more the goals from the Paris agreements. It was in the Paris Agreement on this event. It was unclear on how much and how quickly each nation should cut its emissions. Nevertheless, there were some advances in the agreement. However, there was some change in the vocabulary. For example, instead of saying phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, in the end, it was changed at the very last time by phase down fossil fuel subsidies, which means instead of cutting them out completely from right the moment when the agreement was established. So I think there's a microphone on. So it was established, thank you. So it was written to phase down fossil fuel subsidies, which means that they will disappear little by little. So according to the Climate Action Tracker, the current policies put the world on the path to a global warming of 2.7 degrees. So there's still a lot to do, and I hope that in this next COP event in Egypt, more agreements are going to be reached. So why is this COP27 event special? Well, it is happening in Africa, and which means maybe some of the main topics I'm going to cover. It's the implementation of climate change action. And sorry. So this COP27 aims to achieve, it's focusing especially from moving out to pledges from the wheels of every negotiation from every COP event to implementation. It's going to focus on climate action. So it's going to focus as well on adaptation, adjusting to current and future climate change impacts, and to reach more finance contribution by developed countries to help the countries in development up to the year 2025. So now I'm going to present you François-Marie Réon for the first presentation. He's a climatologist and a researcher and deputy director at the Laboratory of Climate and Environmental Sciences at the Institute Pierre-Simon Laplace in Paris. His research focuses on the use of satellites to understand the Earth's climate, the Earth's energy balance, and he's one of the authors of the chapter Natural and Anthropogenic Radiative Forcings from the 5th IPCC report.
Hello, everyone. I would like to share my presentation, maybe. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. So good day, everyone. And so I was asked to to start this panel discussion. And so, as it was said, I'm a climatologist in France, and I was involved in the writing of the 5th IPCC report. So some background, but you certainly all know that, is that the Earth's temperature is increasing, and in the last IPCC report, it was stated that the Earth has warmed by 1.1 degree. And when you say 1.1, you actually it's based on the difference between the last 10 years compared to what happened during the second half of the 19th century. And so there was this increase of 1.1 degree, but I think that is kind of misleading as it is shown on the upper left graph, because this upper left graph shows the temperature over the land in red and the temperature over the ocean in blue. And so the 1.1 is some kind of weighted average between the blue and the red. And what is shown is that the temperature are rising much faster over land than over the ocean. And as you know, most humans live over land, and most of the biodiversity also is over land. And therefore, this is why I think that this 1.1 degree that is often stated is kind of misleading. For most people, the warming is actually larger than that. And more than that, and that is what is shown on the bottom right part of the figure, is it's an evaluation of the extreme temperature, and I'm sorry, that's only for France. And what is shown is that actually these extreme temperature have increased by actually more than 2 degrees. There is some kind of amplification, and therefore you really should not think that because the Earth has warmed by 1.1 degree, the extreme have also warmed by 1 degree. I mean, there is this amplification that is really large. There are other facts, there are other signs that the climate is changing. Obviously, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is very large, and we know that actually it's the highest that it has been for at least 2 million years, and probably more than that. Sea level is rising at a rate that is at least faster than at least in the past 3,000 years. And the Arctic sea ice is at a very low surface, and at least for it's the lowest surface for at least 1,000 years. And also there is a retreat, I mean the decrease of the glaciers that is unprecedented in the past 2,000 years. These actually are cautious statements in the sense that these periods are the period for which we do have some kind of proxy, some kind of measurement, but most likely actually the current climate change is unprecedented for more than that. And obviously, and we know from climate simulation that the temperature will continue to rise in the future. And so in the last IPCC report, you have these various scenarios, and some of these scenarios show that it's possible to stay below 2 degrees, but that will require really enormous efforts, a combination of change in the energy supply, of change in the day-to-day life, a change in the agriculture, and change of the way we have practices. But actually, unfortunately, more likely even tell us that we will have an increase of the temperature that will be larger than 2 degrees. And again, this is for the world average, and actually it will be larger over land surfaces. And this leads to climate extreme, and the extremes are heat wave. We also see and we expect larger heavy precipitation. It's very clear. We understand why this happened and why it will happen in the future. But at the same time that there are these heavy precipitation, there is also a chance for additional drought for some region, and obviously this will lead to situations that are very likely to occur to fires, and we already see that, and that will happen more in the future. Some people said that the model cannot be trusted, and I've heard so many times that because it's not possible to predict the weather for the next 2 weeks, it's actually really impossible to predict the climate for the next 50 years. But actually, those figures compare the climate simulation that were done 30 or 20 years ago to actually what happened, and you see that there is actually a very good consistency between what was predicted by the model and what has been observed. And though that gives us some confidence that in fact the model indeed, the climate model indeed, can tell us what the future will be like. And I think this is really important to answer to some of the climate skeptics. One thing that I really would like to stress on is the sea level. I mean, we know that the sea level has increased by more than 100 meters between about 20,000 years ago and about 10,000 years ago. But on the other hand, it was fairly stable for the past 1,000 years. And then the sea level has been increasing again. And this is what is shown on the middle figure. This is the satellite observation for the past 30 years. And these very precise satellite observation tell us that on average, over that period, the sea level rise has been on average 3 millimeters per year. But the more important thing is that there is an acceleration. You see that there is some kind of quadratic feature on this curve. And actually, at the beginning of the period, the rate was about 2 millimeter per year, and now it's more like 4 millimeter per year, and therefore the sea level rise is definitely increasing, and we do understand why. And on the right of the figure, you see what is expected for the future, and really why I want to stress the sea level is that even if we are able to stabilize the temperature, and so this is the scenario that is shown in blue. I've shown you that if we take some very strong measure, it will be possible to stabilize the warming to below 2 degrees. But even if we stabilize the warming below 2 degrees, the sea level rise will continue for the future, and that will obviously have a strong impact on a large fraction of the Earth community that lives close to the coastline, because a lot of areas will be flooded. What happened in France now? I know that we want to make a focus on different regions in the world, and therefore I will make this focus on what happened in France in the past, in 2022. And actually, we had a combination of what really the future will look like. I mean, we had really a concentration of this very strong climate event. It started in the spring. The spring was the winter and the spring was extremely warm, and therefore there was an early blossom of a lot of plants on a lot of trees, in particular for orchids. And then we had a cold spell that was kind of a normal cold spell, but it went over these flowers, because the blossom of the flowers was early in the season, and therefore it had a very large impact. A lot of orchids were actually damaged by this cold spell. And then we had a very dry year. I mean, a year that has been drier than what we had in the past 40 years or something like that. And therefore we had a lot of large forest fires, and it was again a very large fire season, something that was unprecedented for several decades. And we also had several heat waves that maybe were not as intense as the one that we had in 2019 and in particular in 2003. But we had several. We had one in June, we had two in July, and we had one in August. And if we look at the mortality, the number of people that died, there is clearly a correlation between these very large heat waves and the number of people that died. This is on the graph that is on the right. You see the impact both on the heat waves, but also on the COVID that obviously had a large impact on the deaths during the winter, but the impact on the heat waves can be seen during the summer. And finally, I mean, we know that the Mediterranean is extremely warm at present, and we really fear that this will have an impact on the heavy precipitation because very warm Mediterranean means that there is a lot of water vapor in the atmosphere, and really when the atmospheric conditions are right, it may lead to a very heavy precipitation in the very south of France. And this is something that has been that we have experienced in particular in 2019, but we may have some events that are even stronger because of this. And this is my last slide. So what can we do? I'm afraid that whatever we do to limit our emission, adaptation will be necessary because we will have further climate change, and so we need to get prepared for heat wave, for heavy precipitation, for droughts, but also for disruption on the food supplies. We really need to decrease our CO2 emission, and there are several ways that we can do that. I mean, we can have a life that is more sober. A life that is more sober means less travel, less objects that we buy, less heating, cooling of our houses, less meat than we eat. But on the other hand, we can also rely on the technology. Technology may help us to have the same quality of life, but using less energy. Finally, we can also work on your electrification, meaning that we can use the same energy, but instead of using fossil fuel energy, we can try to use electricity, but only if we are able to supply electricity based on low carbon technology, meaning renewable and nuclear. And finally, there's a question whether we will rely one day on engineering, but I hope that we will not have to do that, although it may happen in the future. I want to stress that there is really no consensus, no scientific consensus on whether priority should be given to one versus the other. Some people say that we should go a lot on sobriety, and some others say that we need to go on electrification. Obviously, I think that there is a balance between the three, and everyone has his own opinion on that. And again, there is no scientific consensus on that. Okay, so let me finish on that, and I leave the floor to the other panelists.
Thank you, Francois. I'll present you, let me share for a little moment, a slide. I'll present you Dinara Makova. She's a researcher and a PhD candidate at the University of Berkeley at the Department of Nuclear Engineering with a minor in public policy. Her research topics are clean energy development, end-of-life strategies in the energy sector, and international security, as well as the environmental impact of the mining sector. She also works as well in the Anthropocene Institute, a nonprofit organization located in Palo Alto, California, that focuses together experts and investors to advance in clean energy technologies, and as well as research on climate change. So I'll pass the word to Dinara.
Thank you, Anna. Okay. Can you see my slides?
I can see them.
Okay, good. I'll start then. I'll be brief because I was asked to give a little bit of a background on different scenarios for climate and climate change. I'll start with introduction because there is some misunderstanding about what the climate and what the weather, and weather is more of a local and temporary conditions in the atmosphere that can last unpredicted for up to 2 weeks. And climate is actually an average weather in a given area over a longer period of time. It can last from months to thousands or millions of years. And what we now experience or call climate change is a long-term change in the average weather patterns in local, regional, or earth climate global climates. And as Francois mentioned, climate has always changed. It's normal for our dynamic planet. We have tectonic movements. We have different changes on the larger scale. But what we see right now happen at a shorter period of time. That's what is concerning for researchers, is that some changes happened at a shorter period of time than we would expect it to happen. And there are several indicators, and as Francois mentioned, the ice level, the sea level, temperature, those are things that are observable, and that's why as a researcher and scientist, we always focus on things that are observable, measurable, not what we think or hypothesize, but things that we actually measure and compare to historic data. And I'm from Kazakhstan, and in Kazakhstan, we actually could observe a lot of changes over the winter, especially in how much snow we get when the winter starts, how cold it gets, and how hot it gets. Because in the last, especially 5 years, the winters have been quite different. And at the same time, the area, some areas will experience quite different changes. Some areas will have more changes, and some areas maybe not face any changes at all. And so that's why I wanted to show this average temperature changes, because it depicts how different areas actually will face temperature changes. So that's why we will see some of the people who will say, oh, nothing changed in the last 50 years. It's like we've had some floods, we had some temperature variations. But yes, maybe because you're located in the area where those changes are not observable, and there are some areas, especially in the up in the north of the hemisphere, where up in the north of our planet, where we will see the changes as high as 4 degrees centigrade in the last 50 years. So again, we're taking the average over the period of time. In this case, the baseline was taken for the 20 years from 50s to 70s, and then the current state was measured through the average between 2011 to 2021. And that's why it's important to see how the whole planet reacts on these changes, rather than ask particular people what's their opinion about the climate change. Of course, it will vary, because some areas even see the drop of the temperature, and that's normal because the ecosystem will respond differently in different scale. So how did we come up with the metric of greenhouse gas emissions? Again, researchers were so curious, like what exactly is going on, how we actually see the changes, and what assumption was initially that the human activity changed some of the ecosystems. And indeed, in the last, especially 70 years, we have been developing rapidly. And for that development, we burned a lot of fuel that we had at the time, and mostly it was coal and then oil and gas. And using those fossil fuels generates a product when carbon reacts with oxygen at high temperature. We get carbon dioxide, which is a gas which goes straight into the atmosphere, and this is where we get big levels of those. And right now we're at roughly about 40 billion tons generated of carbon emissions, and this is a very rapid increase that is projected to only grow, because yes, some countries, they got their development economically, but there are so many countries that still behind and still are not able to provide basic healthcare, education, and fridges, like air conditioning, and they will keep up with this development. With that, we would expect that this emission will grow if we don't make difference or don't change the way we do develop. And the reason why we focused on carbon emissions So basically, this is the largest by amount greenhouse gas, and also it is measurable. There is a station at Mauna Loa which started their observation in 60s, and I specifically put pre-industrial level concentration of carbon dioxide in atmosphere, just to give you a perspective. So the model amount of carbon dioxide in pre-industrial level was 280. That number is roughly this, but it might be a little bit different. But this is give you a baseline information. And where we are now is 220, and this is the highest number. And as you can see, this number is not going down, it's only growing. And last year, this is the 2021 was like the highest from the observation, and this year we still have to see how this variation changes. And of course, based on this information, there are several scenarios of how we will see the impact of the growing greenhouse gas emissions. All of them are not super positive because we already in the middle when the Earth is heated by one degree centigrade, and unfortunately it's not reversible. It will take a lot of time to cool down the Earth even if we curb down emissions back to zero. In case if we go with the same route as we're going, emitting as much carbon dioxide as we do and burning as much of fossil fuel. And I want to say also about the biomass, because it's also something that emits carbon dioxide. So we have to be careful about that. So if we go with the same route, we will experience average up to 5 degrees centigrades temperature rise all over the world. And I want to mention that this is average. Countries like Kazakhstan in the middle of continent, they will see the rise up to 5.3 degrees centigrades. And compared to many other places, I would say the northern part of planet might see those rapid and drastic increases of temperature by the end of the century. There are also several scenarios. As we currently have curbed down some emissions, we started implementing deployment of green energy solutions. We electrifying rapidly, investing in the sector. If we go as we are doing right now and trying to curb down some of the emissions, unfortunately, we will see about 3 degrees centigrades of temperature rise. This is also not an ideal scenario. And there are several pledges that are widely discussed at the COP and among researchers that we cannot just go and cut down the emissions. We need to go down to zero. And even though once the technology already sequesters some of the carbon emissions from the atmosphere and probably convert it into more solid form and actually help the Earth to cut down those carbon, to remove those carbon emissions from the atmosphere. And I wanted to share this slide because I think it's important to understand the scale and who actually will be impacted by poor policy decisions. And it's important that every single person of a general public will be should be proactive, because it's not the government members who will be facing the drastic impact as flooding, as displacement. It will be general public who will see the flooding, who will be displaced, who will see some of the countries and some of the areas to be flooded completely. And this slide was created by Carl, the founder of Anthropocene, and kind of gives a little bit of humor to the situation that at some point we only will be able to see cities that are thriving today, such as Tokyo, Miami, Bangkok, as a guided scuba tour, because if we go with the projected carbon emissions as we go right now, this will be the only way we will be able to visit those cities. And as I said, we have to be proactive. We have to make sure that our voice is heard and remove the skepticism, because the climate change is happening and there are so many evidences of that. With that, I'm going to let another speaker to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dinara. That was a great presentation. I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to present the next speaker. So next one is Sohail Gora from Egypt. She's a biologist, professor of radiation molecular biology from the National Center for Radiation Research and Technology in Egypt. And she also belongs to the Egyptian Atomic Energy Authority. She has worked as well in the National Specialized Committee for Biotechnology and Genetic Engineering, and has worked as a scientific advisor as well to the African Institute for Biomedical Science and Technology. She's as well the founder and president of Women in Nuclear Egypt and the acting president of Women in Nuclear Africa. So welcome to her. Let's start the presentation.
I will speak today on climate change, weather disasters, and health effects on African women, especially. It was on African women. Okay. Next, please. As you know, that this is the map of global warming from Massa, and we can see that Africa shares a lot of hot water, warming global in the continent. The next slide shows that the focal part where there are drought in Africa, we can see that is in middle of Africa, and it is in South Africa at the west and south coast. Now this is the map of the fires that happened worldwide, and we can see that Africa shares a lot of these fires in it. Also, it has been shown that mountains in Africa, like Mount Kilimanjaro, there were glaciers. These glaciers had decreased in their size. Let's see, Mount Kilimanjaro in 2000, there is a lot of glaciers, but in 1993 there was a lot of glaciers, but in 2000 it have decreased. The same with Mount Kenya and the same with the Rwenzori Mountain, which are sources for rivers in Africa. Next, please. This is Aswan disaster. This happened last December in Egypt, and we can see that there was a flood. The flood covered the street, and scorpions went out from their nest and became in contact and bite some of the people. In Egypt, we bury our dead in rooms and not in boxes like the European style. So the flood caused the dead bodies to come out from their tombs. This is also a flood in Sudan. An estimated of 1 million people have been affected by the flood since July to November 2020, and people become discharged from their houses. Same happened in Mozambique, and the same happened in South Africa. The flood has covered all the world. In Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya, the water rainfall have decreased in size, and this caused a lot of famine in these three countries, and world aid came to those countries to save the children and the women, and as you can see, the livestock is greatly affected from this drought. The Lake Chad, it is a lake between Nigeria, Cameroon, Niger, and Chad. It have decreased from its size 1/10. So what caught, and this caught the attention of the world toward the end of the last year, is the shrinkage of bacteria falls to mere trickles due to this disastrous droughts in the region. There were suggested reasons suggested by the United Nations Environmental Protection and the Lake Chad Commission that this is due to global warming. Also, exhaustion of the lake water could be due to human activities and overgrazing. Next, please. So we can decrease it. We can summarize that global warming causes warmer land and air, warmer ocean and air. Melting of glaciers decreases due to decreased formation of glaciers. We have high levels of ocean and sea. We have decrease in river resources, and this deforestation and desertification happened. Also, there is a change. There are some places where there were heavy rain. Now it became decreased, and where heavy rain are expected to occur, the rain become decreased. This causes a lot of damage to the exposed area. We can see damage to infrastructure, increased immigration and discharging. We have health effect. This health effect can be divided into hygiene-related illness, nutrition-related diseases, vector-borne diseases, air respiratory illness, and heat-induced diseases, and also food insecurity in those exposed areas. And this food insecurity also causes nutrition-related diseases. There are environmental effects, loss of water resources, change in biological diversity, erosion of coastal area, ecosystem and structure functioning. So food supply and safety, when discussing food and nutrition, there will be a decrease in the agriculture of output that happened due to flood or happened due to global warming or drought. There will be a decrease in food availability, a decrease in food variety and nutritious food, and there is a loss of livestock. So now we're going to speak about the changed health effects due to changes in allergen. You know, health effects in hot climate. There is change in allergens. Allergens are particles found on the air that will cause inflammation in the respiratory system. So it might cause asthma exacerbation or atopic dermatitis. We have also changes in the carbon dioxide. Changes in the carbon dioxide concentration can cause asphyxia, headache, dizziness, confusion, and loss of consciousness. We have hygiene-related illness. So in case of floods, there will be a cholera, diarrheal diseases. There can be, due to bad hygiene, tuberculosis, hookworm, scabies, and leptospira. Also, we have vector-borne diseases that are transmitted by mosquito due to the presence of swamps. And as we know, mosquito lives in swamps. And examples of this that happens in Africa are the yellow fever, the dengue fever, Rift Valley fever, malaria, and Zika virus. Next, please. Now we speak about what happens from hot weather. If the weather is become 40 degrees centigrade, the body will try to reduce this heat. We have what is called in the brain the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will increase the sweat, and the hair becomes flat, and there will be vasodilatation of the blood vessel. This allows the heat to be which allow the body to decrease its temperature. So there is always a metabolic rate decrease and increase of respiration. Sometimes the hypothalamus, the heat is so high or the temperature is high, that the body cannot compensate this high temperature. So we get what is called heat stroke. A heat stroke is there are systemic inflammation, or there are myogene breakdown. Myogene is a protein found in the muscles, and due to heat, the muscle become myogene is liberated from the muscle because the muscle become distracted, and this and together with potassium, the myogene will cause an impact on the kidney, and in severe cases this might cause kidney failure, and the potassium will cause the heart to increase its pumping, and that might cause heart failure. We also, the heat stroke can be accompanied with pulmonary edema, liver failure, and disseminated intravascular coagulation. Next, please. Also, there are in food insecurity due to the loss of the crops, loss of livestock. So there are a lot of nutrition-related diseases. We can find increase in hypertension, underweight, and in hypertension it has been reported that females are more affected than males. Underweight females are less affected than males by the underweight. There are nutrition-related diseases like anemia, diabetes mellitus, cardiovascular diseases, and anemia affects women than it affects men, and anemia is a bad condition for a pregnant woman because its offspring would be affected and it will be born weak. Also, the nutrition-related diseases, there are dyslipidemia, and males are affected than females. There is the stunning or growing shorter. Males are affected than females. There is the overweight. Females are become affected than males. And the microbiome, it is the microbiome which is the bacteria present in our body and has an important function. So the microbiome will be changed, and this will cause increased susceptibility to infection. Next, please. Well, these disasters happened in any part of the world. However, in Africa, the effect is more pronounced because the health system in Africa is not like the health system in other developed countries. Primary healthcare systems are weak in many low and middle income countries and fail to provide high quality, comprehensive, people-centered integrated care. Often systems are compromised by under-resourcing, fragmentation, and poor governance. Despite of the growing burden of non-communicable disease, many low and middle class income countries lack funds for preventive services. Community health workers are often under-resourced, poorly supported, and lacking training. Health insurance schemes are hampered by fragmentation of public and private systems, underfunding, corruption, and poor engagement of good workers. Also, in Africa, they use herbal or African medicine because it is cheap and economic, and it is and people get used to it. However, the side effects and the benefits of this herbal medical system are not well evaluated. Next, please. I'm going to say an example of the biological diversity that happened in Africa. There is a coral species, Loptophilia pertusa, is involved in the reef formation. Its branching hair and orogenic skeleton offer protection, breeding sites, and habitats for numerous other species in cold water. Since cold water corals grow on the skeleton firmly attached to the seabed, they are exposed to the current to transport food particles for them. Now, due to global warming, they have found that these coral reefs have died in Namibia and in South Africa. These coral reefs were have sources of food for the penguins living in these areas, and we can see that these penguins have disintegrated or decreased in the number in Namibia and South Africa due to global warming. Next, please. Also, there are some animals that have decreased in their numbers because of fires in the forest in Africa, like the Dama gazelle, the Sinsmitar horned oryx, the Barbary monkey, and the Addax ante. Higher sea temperature linked to climate change have doubled the likelihood of drought in the Horn of Africa region. Severe droughts in 2011, 2017, 19 have repeatedly wiped up crops and livestock. Droughts have left 15 million people in Ethiopia, Kenya, in need of aid, yet is only 35% funded. People has been left without the means of food on their table and were forced to leave their homes. Millions of people are facing food and water shortage. This is for a joke. In Aswan, in Egypt, the temperature was 45 degrees centigrade. So it was claimed that maize turned into popcorn because of global warming. Thank you from Win Africa.
Thank you, Soher. Thank you very much. It was funny to see the last image of the corn popping due to the heat. Yeah, I'm from Spain, and we have we say that we can also cook an egg on the street as well in some of the hottest cities during summer. So, okay. I'm going to present for the next participant. He won't do a presentation. He will participate in the following part, the panel discussion. It is Ahmed Fati, a climate activist and founder of Young Love Egypt Foundation, a non-lucrative association doing different activities for climate change in Africa. He's graduated from the Faculty of Commerce in Cairo University, has been a national coordinator for the Pan-Africa Climate Justice Alliance, and he's been also a speaker and participant in the United Nations General Assemblies, as well as in other events such as the Conference of the African and Mediterranean Environment Ministers. So, hello, Ahmed. I don't know if he can hear us.
Yes, I hear you, and
okay,
I'm very
perfect.
glad to listen to all of my colleagues.
Okay, we're happy to have you. So we'll pass to the panel discussion, and we're going to talk in the first place. We're going to present different questions about different topics, and we're going to debate about it. So for the first question, we have how long does the CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions stay in the atmosphere? How long does that translate into temperature warming? For this question, we'll have I'll go by order, and so I'll let speak François.
Yeah, so it's a big tricky question because some people believe that there is a linear or exponential decrease of the CO2 in the atmosphere, but it's actually more complicated than that. So roughly, we may say that half of the CO2 that is emitted today will stay in the atmosphere for roughly 100 years, but the other half will take much longer to disappear and to be absorbed in the ocean. So an order of magnitude is between 100 and 1,000 years, although this is not a definite answer. And if you really want to know about that, it's fairly well explained in the IPCC report. The various processes that take up the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to the ocean and then to the sediments. And how that translates to the temperature, well, the impact of the CO2 to the temperature is much faster, but there is also this kind of nonlinear effect. So most of the warming takes like 1 or 2 years, but then it takes much longer to make up the other part of the warming, and therefore, even if we are able to stabilize the concentration in the atmosphere, you will still have a few tenths of a degree temperature increase during the next decade. But most of the warming is really clearly directly related to how much carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere, although not all.
Okay, thank you, Francois. So next, Dinara.
I have almost nothing to add to Francois' response because it's it's well said. The only thing to give you kind of idea why we didn't have this greenhouse gas emission effect back in pre-industrial level, because the natural sinks, they took care of this carbon dioxide. It was always there. We breathe out carbon dioxide, the trees breathe in, the oceans also. But at some point, the buildup of this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was bigger than the natural processes could process it. That's why it's like there is no linear or direct linkage between the temperature, but at the same time, we have to cut down the emissions to the level that was pre-industrial in order to let the planet absorb the CO2 and start those effects, kind of take those effects to kind of remediate itself.
Yeah, so there will be like a very long process.
Yeah.
Let's say even till 100 years, between 100 and 1,000 years, said Francois.
I agree
Just
with that
less,
numbers.
yeah.
Yes, I would think maybe within that range.
So even if we maintain, if we stop our emissions right now, we'll have several effects. As we said, we're going to have a warming already. We're having already a warming of 1.5 degrees.
Exactly. This is non-reversible at this point, and that's why in one of the sorry, that's in my room, I guess. That's why it's important to consider the carbon removal technologies later in the stage, like maybe in the next 20 years, develop technology that would capture the carbon from the atmosphere and convert it into a solid form and kind of store it as a solid in the as a rock or something like this.
Okay, and we also need to consider where it gets absorbed in the earth. Like, does not only go away. Like the oceans are absorbing as well, right, Francois? You said as well. Okay, producing acidification as well. So okay, so her, if you want to answer as well.
I think we could move on to the next question.
Yeah, yeah, I think okay.
If we want to keep time for many questions, I think it's more.
Yeah, okay, I'll go to the next one. So this one's a bit more, gives a lot of debate to talk about. For a person with no experience or studies on climate and environment, who reads, finds a lot of news about climate change or even news that are neglecting this climate change, are saying that it's a hoax. What would you teach to this person? You know, like to the general public, what would you teach to them how to be able to differentiate between false studies and true studies that follow the science, that follow empirical results? How do you detect the creators of doubt? As we know that we find a lot of media, we find like a lot of voices and a lot of noise talking about the warning about climate change on one side, and then suddenly we have another, but there's this study that was saying it's false. So, okay, I'm gonna pass the word to Francois.
Okay, so the first thing when people tell you, oh, there is this new discovery, the first thing to ask is whether there is a scientific publication that is attached to it. If there is no scientific publication and there is only a paper in a general public journal, or if it's just something that you heard on the TV, it just makes you should have no confidence in it. To have confidence, you need at least a scientific publication that describes the thing. But it's not enough. I mean, there are also scientific publications that are complete craps. And so the next step is to have several publications that say the same thing, that the discovery has been confirmed by a different team. And that's if the same result has been confirmed by a different team, then obviously it gives more weight to it. And finally, I mean, the highest level to get the confidence is when you have a scientific consensus. I mean, when a science community that is described, for instance, by an academy of science of somewhere, if an academy of science gives a statement, then it shows that indeed there is a consensus in the scientific community, and then you can have a great confidence on that statement. So different level of confidence. First, a scientific publication, then several scientific publications, then a scientific consensus that is given either by an academy of science or for instance, by the IPCC that really describe what is the scientific consensus on climate.
Okay, thank you, Francois. Dinara?
No, it was excellent answer. The only, I guess, the difference of what we can check and what we can't is that there are always factual things that you can measure, check, and confirm with another person, and there's opinion. And the opinion is hard to check because it's something very subjective and hard to prove, but the factual things, they always will be in the publication or the data that NASA publishes on the website, like things that we can compare, check, reproduce. If there's one publication, you can try to reproduce the data and check whether it makes sense. But for general public, we have to distinguish. Maybe it's an opinion, and if it's opinion, like we probably have to be very skeptical about that. But if there's opinion and they cite a certain paper that was in kind of peer-reviewed article, or just like be curious. For me, it's always curiosity. You see something weird written, and that's very common about nuclear industry. Most of the publications coming as opinions, and it's really hard for general public to understand where the actual data coming from or how to check whether it's true or not. And the only way is to be curious and try to track down where this data coming from, like not blindly kind of trust the number.
Thank you, Dinara. Suher?
Well, I usually use the PubMed. I use the publications of the WHO, United Nations publication, ENP, UNP. This is our sources. Okay. Especially the WHO, I depend on it and on the PubMed.
Okay, yeah, governmental institutions that are peer-reviewed, let's say, by different scientists and experts, yeah. So that we have a scientific consensus, right, as Francois was saying before. Yeah, so that's very important. And okay, so let's pass to the next question. So why do you think that some people and head of states still don't believe in climate change and the science behind it? This is a special one, since we have a lot of presidents in the world that still are denying climate change. And
I'll take a stop and start, because I think it's important to acknowledge that we all people, and especially people such as head of states, they don't necessarily have a niche knowledge in particular field, and people around them not necessarily have that knowledge. And I think that's the biggest flaw of the systems we have. We don't have experts in the field in the government. This is where the disconnect coming. We need to, like, it's ideal to have experts as a minister, or at least they have experience working in the field, like Minister of Healthcare. I would prefer the person who worked in the healthcare for 10 years to be a minister, but unfortunately this is not the case. And this is where it comes as a root challenge for that, the head of states, they don't get the right information, or they get the opinions of people who are trying to kind of deliver their interests through this kind of prism.
Okay, Francois?
Well, I'm not fully convinced that some head of state don't believe in climate change. And maybe they say that they don't believe in it because they don't want to take the measures that would be necessary if they were to acknowledge that they believe in climate change. Because you know that fighting climate change requires some measures that are very difficult to take. And therefore, because they don't want to take these measures, then it's maybe simpler to say that, oh, but I don't believe in climate change, and therefore I can continue to burn my fossil fuel as much as I want. So because I just think that now the evidence are so overwhelming that it's just not possible to not believe about climate change. Maybe you can say, oh, but okay, climate change is happening, but it's all natural. It has nothing to do with human. Maybe this is still a bit possible if you really don't look at the science and what the. But I mean, for me, the most likely hypothesis is that they just don't want to take the measure, and so it's an easy way out. But it's only an opinion. I'm not in their head, so I don't know exactly.
Yeah, I guess that there's also the economic interest of a government, right?
Exactly. So that's
yeah.
They don't want to take the measure, and therefore they don't say anything about it.
Okay. So her, what's your opinion about it?
Any person in my age must believe in climate change. When I was young and waiting for my bus in the morning, I used to wear gloves and I used to wear a coat. Nowadays, I seldom use a glove and I seldom use a coat. So I think the climate change is real, but government has funding, has economics, has things of their own which makes them make their decision. It is not their own opinion. It is usually what they are obliged to do.
Yeah, I guess that you also need a lot of fundings to start taking measures. It's as some people, experts say that it's GDP. It's linked with CO2 emissions. Sometimes it's a really difficult equation, right? So Ahmed, what do you think? What is your opinion about it?
My opinion is just there is some way from the ministers or from the countries to run away from their responsibility. When we see Trump 2016 say, I didn't believe in climate change and COP and the Paris Agreement, I'm not part of this. In this situation, you are just kidding or laughing or something, because every one of these countries had a scientific committee and scientific researchers and consultants and everything. If anyone couldn't see the climate issues around them, they need to see a doctor to check them eyes or to check them feelings about the warm, about the wind, about the raining, about the floods, about blah, 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 blah. So I see this is some ways from some people don't want to be in the place of responsibility. They would like to find something for themselves, because when they came to sleep in the evening and they check in their mind, do I like what I'm doing in my life? you find something inside, is it say you are good, you can sleep. But when you go deeply, no, there's something huge, and the climate change is everywhere, and it is blonde. Person is blonde if you couldn't see the climate change, or couldn't feel the climate change everywhere inside the world. This year we saw a lot of crises because of climate change, and everywhere in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, and everywhere we can see climate change crisis. So we need these people to be more respectable for them people and for them themselves, and then for the science, because nothing is changing without the science. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. And the next topic, this one might go more for Ahmed directly. Ahmed and Soher, since they're living in Egypt. What agreements do you think that might be reached for the next COP27 that is going to take this year? So, Soher, what do you think?
What?
Well, what I know is that our president is interested in water resources. So the COP27 will speak mainly about water resources.
Okay, thank you. And you, Ahmed?
Yes, as I have attended COP26, COP25, and my organization had officially delegation for COP27, and as one of the co-hosts for COP17, which will take place before the COP, I can say COP27 will focus in climate finance. That is the first. Second, there is two new initiatives have been launched by the COP presidency. One of this initiative for agriculture, and the second one for water resources. And it will be something very, very good to listen in Sharm el-Sheikh. And I hope to have a Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, because the slogan for COP27 is COP for implementation, not COP for promises. If you attend in a meeting in climate with the COP presidency, you will find them always say it's COP for implementation. So it's the time, and it's African COP. I was in Gabon a few days ago attending Africa Climate Week, and all the ministerial in Africa for climate or for environment have one goal, that to make this COP for implementation and to very focus for climate finance. And from my side, if I'm a decision maker, I will put loss and damage finance at the top of agenda. As you know, in Glasgow Agreement, they put it like a promise that they will do something for loss and damage finance. But when we go to SB's meeting in Germany in June, they say, no, we are sorry, we couldn't add it to the agenda. So I think Africa people, as talking as a civil society, one of the top things that have to be at COP27 is loss and damage finance to the development countries, which are surviving the climate issues every day. You can see floods in Sudan in past few weeks, and they don't have infrastructure for these floods. So it is something always we listen when we have some porns in Europe, or we have some floods in some rich countries. But when it's come to Sudan or come to some countries, sub-Saharan countries, we just hear it in some news. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. All right, and one last part from this panel discussion, just a quick, if for the speakers, if you have any specific book, podcast, or tool that you can recommend to the audience to continue their learning about climate change and all the policies around it, the physics and all the policies. So, Francois?
Well, we recommend the IPCC report, and in particular the summary for policymakers. I mean, if you really want to know about the science, this is this report do describe the science, and so this is why I recommend that. I could recommend my own books, but it's only in a French language, and I don't think that it will be translated to English. So for French people, French-speaking people, I do have a book that I think is interesting. But mostly I recommend to have a look at the summary for policymaker of the IPCC report.
Thank you, Francois. Well, maybe we'll let translate it to English, who knows? And you, Dinara?
I think one resource I found, because I was trying to find the way to work with the skepticism about climate change. And there is a website called Skeptical Science, which kind of walks you through the arguments that some people might bring up, like, okay, the climate was changing all the time, but, and then what kind of arguments you might have. So this I find useful because it's in plain language and it kind of gives you idea what can be the flaws of those opinions and where you can actually take in more information.
Thank you, Dinara. I published the website on the chat. Okay. And you, Sahar?
Well, because I speak from the point of health view, I recommend WHO and United Nations Environmental Protection Agency.
You, Ahmed?
Yes, I'm always following UN Learn, United Nations Education for Learn. It is something very, very good. And I'm trying always to something we have it issue in it in Arabic area, that most of the reports is come in English. We don't have reports come in Arabic. Maybe IPCC report last August last year. We got the translation of it in June, in February or March 2022. So it takes many time. So what we try to do inside our organization, that we try any report is coming, we try to make a summary of it in Arabic to allow and make justice for the education for the local people. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ahmed. So, okay, let's pass now to the round of questions. So let's check from the chat some of the questions that have been published, and I will let the speakers to answer them. First of them from Hamed Kodadadi. Thank you for your presentation. As far as I understand, different strategies are based on average climate data, while as Dinara noticed, there are places that the situation is worse and perhaps they need to be considered more carefully. Are there different remedies, emergency planning for those regions?
Yes, that's a very good question, and unfortunately, it doesn't have a good answer. The climate fund was supposed to address this kind of uneven distribution of things because developed world has achieved the development through burning fossil fuels, but most of the consequences will happen in island nations, in less developed world. Like some of the countries will be completely gone under the sea, like Maldives, but unfortunately there is no, well, not a good consideration when it comes to that, answering that question, like how can we localize the remediation strategies. So that's why it's important to have a uniform decision. Okay, how are we going to proceed? Is it like 1 degree centigrade, 1.5 degree or 2 degrees strategy? How can we curve down emissions all over the place? Because of course, it's expensive to implement some strategies, but it can be useless in case if, for example, United States keeps burning as much fossil and keeps up with the same strategy, while recently they've been contributing to the climate fund the least among the most developed countries. And this is kind of the stance of things because there's not enough communication between two blocks, but the consequences will be mostly faced by developing world. So unfortunately, I don't have the right answer and like more assuring answer in this case.
Okay, thank you, Dinara. For the next question, I want to see. So Levente C. Skelly, sorry for the pronunciation. Diseases, we have diseases, droughts, lack of food and potable water will drive people out of the countries most affected by climate change. Is there a scenario to model this migration? Do the developed countries have plans or at least consider a solution for the treating of these people? This is a key issue, especially in light of the 2015 migrant crisis experienced by Europe. So for this one, who thinks that might answer best for this one? François?
Okay, I will try, but I'm definitely not a specialist of that. In France, we do have an IPCC author who has been working, who is a specialist of migration, and obviously the migration that are linked to climate change. And so this is definitely something that is being looked at. We know that there are some parts of the world where climate change will be so large that the agriculture won't be able to sustain the people that live there, and therefore we know that that will lead to migration, and that has already started actually in some part of the world. And this is actually a big issue in developed countries that most of them, they do not want to see people coming into their own land. And so I think that this is something that is seen in the United States, it is seen in Europe, and in particular in France. There's a tendency of population in France to not want French people to come there, and actually it's a very big political debate, and some political parties actually are making most of their existence on the fact that they want to repulse, to move away, to not let foreign people come to their land, and therefore it is already an issue in Europe and other parts of the world, but I'm afraid that it will become even larger in the future, more larger of an issue in the years to come because of the increase of the climate migrants.
Yeah, this is why sometimes we talk about the fundings, right, from different COP events, fundings to be sent to countries in development that in the end are not fully sent, and they're in the form of loans. And you, Ahmed, what do you think about it? Are there, do you know of any plans from any governments about these migratory movements that might happen?
For me, always try to wait for the thing to happen to talk about it, because many times it will be just promises, but when it goes on the ground, it take much time. But I think many of the African countries and many of the Arab region countries try to focus in this very important, because they are facing the climate change in this time. So it is one of the things they put them in their top agenda. So let's wait and see how it will go at COP27. After that, COP28 with the two countries in the MENA region and the Arab region. So it will be something very, very good to understand from the fact and from the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. So, Her, do you have something to say?
Yes, I want to say that African countries have poor infrastructure, and when a flood comes, it destructs all the houses, and people become dislodged and they live in tents. And also, as I said before, that food security is quite affected. So usually outside aid from the UN and from other countries come to rescue these people. And these people, African people, are greatly affected.
Thank you, Sahar. And the last question, which is two questions. Oh. Let me check for the next one. Okay. This is a bit not really related exactly about the climate change physics behind it. It's about nuclear plants. Nuclear plants is a great dependable way to generate electricity without generating CO2. Unfortunately, it is currently subject to lots of bureaucracy, which delayed the start of the actual building work by several years. How can we greatly reduce all this bureaucracy time to just a few months? Wow, that's quite optimistic. Yeah.
That's really optimistic because that bureaucracy was created to make energy well regulated, hence safe, because the liability can be really enormous if we just start doing really things fast, not tested. So I don't think we need to cut down the regulation terms, but what we can do is to create a mass production. So in this case, we don't need to relicense a new design of the reactor, but we could like build the same type, because in the United States, the biggest mistake was like they were building different design every single time, making it expensive, and because of that, it just longed to license every new design kind of change. I think what we're getting now, especially in China, Russia, what they trying to do is to build one same design so many times and simplify the production line and manufacturing to make it like a serial production. That can cut the building time or construction time rather than licensing a site and then the design initial design licensing. So it's really like it will be ideal to have something approved within 2 months, but unfortunately there are so many liability issues related to building nuclear power plant. There's like proliferation risks and so on and so forth. So I would advocate for building similar design as many times as possible, kind of create a serial line and just make sure we have something more deployable in terms of the size, and then kind of make things easier to replace and put in more remote locations rather than build like a larger scale nuclear power plant. But yes, I agree. It is resilient. It can provide so many options, even like the desalinated water. And further online, there is so much research and development going into carbon sequestration and then hydrogen production. So like the options are endless. It's just the way we treat it as differently. I'm happy that we included nuclear into green term as green in taxonomy, and then so that really shows the effort in Europe to build new reactors. But on the bright side, what I can see the trend is nuclear startups. They try to target a developing world, like some African countries, Central Asian countries, where there is no regulatory framework in place yet. And so that helps a lot into building, letting country build a new nuclear framework that accounts for inefficiencies that, for example, in the United States, we have like the way things are approved. There are so many things that could be omitted right away just because like 50 years ago, they made sense. Maybe 30 years ago, they made sense. Today, it just doesn't. And especially for advanced reactor, we need to have completely new regulatory framework. And I think starting with developing world, helping them build new regulatory framework that accounts for those inefficiencies will help cut down those building times and actually make it not like 4 years approval, but significantly less. But of course, not 2 months. But
thank you, Dinara. So, and for you, Francois?
Well, this is not my area of competence, so I don't know. The only thing I can say is that indeed, I mean, France had a great success on developing a huge nuclear fleet in the 70s and 80s. And as I was, and indeed, the part of that success was based on the fact that it was all the same model, all the same design, and that obviously helped a lot on reduce the cost. But unfortunately, what France succeeded to do in the 70s and 80s, it seems that we are not able to do it again because we have a huge difficulty in building one single nuclear reactor. So I don't know if we will be able to do the same in the future, but I certainly agree that the key for success is to choose for a design and build multiple reactors of the same design.
Yes, so we agree on that the same design
Definitely.
repeatedly, it helps a lot. Yeah, we saw that in France, yeah, as François said, in the 70s. And for you, Soher?
Well, it is not my specialty, so I cannot answer you.
Okay. All right. So, all right. Is there anyone else that has more questions? Like, if you want to write it on the chat.
Okay, actually, I will have to go, Anna. So.
Okay. That's perfect. Thank you so much, François.
Okay. See ya.
See you. All right. So there are no more questions left. I will pass to ending the meeting. So I want to thank all of the attendees for coming here. And I just want to inform you that we'll have other two PreCOP events online that will take place. The second one, the 4th of October, about climate solutions. It will basically tackle the ways we can decarbonize the economy in any sector, like energy, transport, agriculture. So, and the third one will be about climate action, which will talk about how can we implement these solutions now, like the policies that are in the middle, integration, or the collaborations that can be done. So that's basically it. The second one, climate solutions, 4th of October at 5 p.m., the same time as today, 5 p.m. Central Europe time. For all those that live in another place of the planet, just use your time converters. And the third one, climate action, which will take place on November 2nd at 5 p.m. CET as well. So stay tuned for it and follow us on the website or on social network. On net0needsnuclear.com, or you can also follow us on Nuclear for Climate on Twitter, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn. So thank you so much for attending today and for coming to hearing us. I think it was a very nice event. And I want to thank all the speakers for their collaboration as well, for coming here to do for having done their presentations. It requires also a good quantity of time to spend on doing them, and for coming here to talk. I think was a very nice experience. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
See you for the next event. Bye-bye.
Bye.